It's time to rethink, renew, and reimagine retirement. Welcome to Retire Repurposed. This podcast is dedicated to help people transition into fulfilling and purposeful retirements. Retirement is a big life change. In fact, the two most dangerous years of a person's life are the year they were born and the year they retire. We believe that retirement is not the end, rather the beginning of what could be the most impactful season of a person's life. So don't retire, become repurposed. Well, thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Retire Repurposed. Well, on recent episodes, we've been exploring the evolution of the concepts Ben Taatjes laid out in his original book, Repurpose: The Untold Story of Retirement in America, back in 2017. Today, we're taking a special trip down memory lane to episode number 2, where it all began, where Ben introduced this, what he calls the Showroom Effect, a concept that has stood the test of time. As we anticipate the release of his revised edition of Repurposed, this throwback episode reminds us why certain retirement principles remain constant, even as our understanding deepens. Whether you're a longtime listener or new to the show, you won't want to miss this foundational discussion that has helped us launch over 200 episodes of retirement wisdom. Enjoy this episode. Well, on recent episodes, we've been exploring the evolution of the concepts Ben Taatjes laid out in his original book, Repurpose: The Untold Story of Retirement in America, back in 2017. Today, we're taking a special trip down memory lane to episode number 2, where it all began, where Ben introduced this, what he calls the Showroom Effect, a concept that has stood the test of time. As we anticipate the release of his revised edition of Repurposed, this throwback episode reminds us why certain retirement principles remain constant, even as our understanding deepens. Whether you're a longtime listener or new to the show, you won't want to miss this foundational discussion that has helped us launch over 200 episodes of retirement wisdom. Enjoy this episode. All right, Ben, today we are talking about the showroom effect. That's a pretty big deal. And in fact, you put so much emphasis on this idea of the showroom effect. You dedicated an entire chapter of your book, Repurposed, to this idea, chapter 2, titled just that, the showroom effect. I think a great place to start is really just telling people, maybe define in a general sense, what is the showroom effect?
Yeah, Jared, I think the idea kind of comes out of a personal story that I had, really about something that I thought would fulfill me and didn't. And I'd like to tell that story first before we even get into more details about the showroom effect. But I was about third, fourth grade young man, and enjoying my summers, which back then looked like me being able to, work at our small farm, and then spend most of my days riding this nice little dirt bike that my uncle had given me.
Sure. So you grew up on a farm, West Central Minnesota, and that's kind of like living the dream nowadays, is being able to be a kid and be out on a farm.
And for me, it was living the dream.
Yeah.
Because I would do my chores, because on a farm, a kid, you got to do that work. I didn't get paid for that, but I was able to, take my afternoons and most of the day and ride this little dirt bike all over the countryside. Yeah. And the dirt bike was a hand-me-down relic of a thing. It was, the seat was torn. I can remember specifically the paint was faded and there were some rusty spots, and the gas tank had dents in it, and it didn't work great. But I loved that bike. And I had so many good memories of riding that thing with my brother and friends. And we were all over the countryside, and it was a great summer. But something changed towards the end of that summer for me. What happened was I saw a number of my friends get newer, nicer dirt bikes than what I had. And I started to notice more what I didn't have. I noticed that, my dirt bike didn't look as nice. My dirt bike it wasn't as fast as theirs. And I started comparing it to theirs. And by the end of that summer, I'd actually wanted so badly to upgrade that I talked my dad into taking me to this little showroom at Motorsports of Willmar,
right,
which is a small, it's really a hobby store for where they had, motorcycles,
jet skis, the whole bit,
everything you'd want.
But a literal showroom, which again kind of plays into this whole idea. Go on.
Yeah, I walk into this showroom, And I saw that bike sitting there, brand new XR100, shiny paint. And if you've ever walked into a showroom, and now, now I'm a grown up, right? And now it's cars or something like that. But I think a showroom for toys like this, for motorcycles, that type of thing, is almost better, right? Because it smells new,
right?
But everything in there is made just for fun, right? And it was great. I saw what I had to have, and somehow I convinced my dad into giving me this loan, right? It was I think the bike was $1,500, and I only had 500, so it was $1,000 loan. And I walked out, drove out of there with this little dirt bike. We put it in the truck and drove it home. And my very first ride on that thing, I actually crashed it. I actually dented up one part of it, and it had its first flaw.
Right.
And I'll never forget, and this was also in the fall, so it was a couple rides, and then I had to sit back and think through, all this money I had paid on this dirt bike. And and now he's going to have to work the next summer to pay it off. And it turns out I had to work 2 summers to pay it off. And I really never was fulfilled by this dirt bike. I thought it would have made me happy.
Right.
I thought that motorcycle would have made me feel better, but it didn't. There was something missing there, and I think that's really how we tend to look at things in life. The showroom effect. It's something that you see out there that's shiny and new. It's different.
Gotta have it.
Gotta have it, right? And usually, once you have it, you're very let down by it.
Yeah. I've as a guy, I think we guys tend to probably struggle with this a little bit more. And then I'm not talking about retirement, but things. I've done this 1,000 times. I also love motorcycles, as you know. But it could be another toy. Recently, I hope my wife isn't listening to this, but a couple of years ago, I wanted a drum set, and you know me because we're personal friends. I have a drum set in my basement, and I've always wanted one when I was a kid. Well, now I grow up, and now I actually have enough money and a house to buy one and put one in. And for like a year, I was like fantasizing about this drum set. And I somehow convinced my wife, like you convinced your dad, to get it. And I was like, this is for the kids. Like,
Right.
This isn't for me.
This is for them.
This is for them. I want to develop their musical skills. The truth was, it was really all about me. And I remember just, again, spending my time thinking about it, researching, seeing people who had this thing, and then just picturing myself having it. And a couple of years ago, we pulled the trigger and bought it. But I remember that feeling went away pretty quickly. It was this thing I thought about constantly, and then I actually have it, and it's a pretty sharp curve downward from a kind of a mental state as to where I went before it and where I went after. And that's kind of the connection that we're starting to see. Have you seen that in your work? I'm assuming the answer is yes, because that's why you put it in your book. But have you seen that sharp decline in contentment with people before and after they actually kind of pull the trigger on retirement?
Yes, because I think the showroom effect implies that something isn't quite what we thought it would be.
Okay.
Right, and that's where I think we gotta look and say it might not live up to your expectations, and there's certain things to be watching out for. To be aware of, right? Because there's nothing wrong with that new dirt bike I got.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with that drum set. But when you expected it to fulfill you in some way, when you expected it to be the answer, right, in some way that it's not, you're putting too much pressure on whatever that is.
Right.
And you can say it about almost anything.
Sure.
Certainly you can say it about retirement. And that was the idea in the book, is we talk about really how we put too much pressure on something to fulfill us, to make us feel better, and they just don't. So a retiree today might think, I'm going to work my whole life so I can get to retirement, because then I'll be there, right? Then I won't have to work, and then everything will be okay.
Right.
Unfortunately, it's not. It does not work that way. Retirement can be a wonderful time, and most retirees have great retirements.
Sure.
But once we look at it and expect it to be what it's not, that's when we start to see what we call the showroom effect.
So it's almost kind of like it's almost like a mirror. And I've heard you talk about this before, and we've mentioned this on other radio shows, where you say if you're unhappy and unfulfilled before this thing, after it, it's not going to be any different. You know what I mean? And like you said, it can apply to anything. When I go out and speak, I'll talk about job and career lots of times, and I say, your job is not meant to fulfill you. And I usually ask the audience a rhetorical question. I say, does anybody in here not feel fulfilled with their current position or job? And I say, don't mention that, because lots of times it's in front of their leadership team.
Yep.
I'm like, if you've ever felt that way, that's okay, because it's not supposed to. You know what I mean? Marriage is also kind of that way too. You and I have both had a chance to mentor younger guys, single guys. And I've actually used these exact words to friends and people that I've mentored that are not married and want to be married someday. I say, if you're looking to your future wife to complete your life, that it just ain't going to happen. Like that, there's no way that a human being can do that for you. Another human being cannot fulfill me. A job can't fulfill me. Motorcycle, drum set, and the same applies to retirement. That's the connection we're trying to make today.
Yeah. Don't fall into that showroom effect that if you are unhappy before retirement, you're probably going to be unhappy in retirement.
Right.
And that's just the way it is. And I think we have to be aware of what retirement is and what it's not. And too many people think, once I get there, I'll be okay. And unfortunately, retirement was, never designed to be that.
Right.
It just wasn't.
Well, how do you see this manifest when people that maybe put retirement too much on a pedestal, you help them retire, they get into it, and then people maybe come back. Is it like 6 months? Is it a year that they come back and say, Ben, it just wasn't what I thought? Does it change for everybody? How do you kind of prepare people listening to this podcast who haven't retired yet to see maybe what's on the other side if they haven't prepared all the way? Is there any way to kind of put that into words?
Yeah, I don't think there's a time or what we've seen normally. I think maybe just look at the people that have retired well. I mean, that's a nice part about, in my business is I've been able to meet with so many retirees, and I've seen so many that have done, really well with this too. And the focus is different. It just is almost always different for a retiree that's what we call nailing it in retirement, doing really well.
Right.
Their focus is different. It was remember we talked a little bit in the last episode about work and what work creates. Well, most of these retirees are able to use some of those skills and those talents, and they're able to flourish in their retirement instead of kind of like, yes, now I'm here. I'm finally here, and now my golf and everything else is going to allow me to be the person I always wanted to be. And it just doesn't work that way. So.
Well, go back to your point that you just made about focus. Focus on what? Again, put the people, categorize the people who have retired, quote, well, and have these fulfilling retirements. What is their focus different on the people who struggle with this?
Yeah. Every time it's other-centered. And being other-centered is a key, whether you're in retirement, nearing retirement, or you're in your 40s, in your 30s, it doesn't matter. Being others focused and making sure that you don't look to make sure I'm happy all the time, but I'm looking at others and making sure I'm providing value some way. I'm making a difference in somebody's life. Those are the retirees that really excel.
Yeah. Talk about contentment. Would you say that contentment is kind of like the X factor? Because that's really what this is kind of about, kind of going back to this. It's not necessarily just a mindset, which I think we could probably talk more about that as well, because we could go back to the why. Why are people, set up this way to feel that retirement's going to be this is all end all? So we could talk about why people feel that way, and then what is that underlying X factor that helps people bridge that gap and do it really smoothly. Which one do you want to start with?
Well, I have this contentment thing, my heart now too, and visiting with clients and stuff. And I think, in today's society, the attitude of consumerism is really the anti-contentment message. Mm-hmm. Like, I have to have it, I have to have it, I have to have it. And I think that has somewhat invaded our view of retirement today.
Sure.
And we put things on a pedestal where they shouldn't be. And society's going to tell us things that probably aren't always true, right? They're going to have us build this thing up to what it's not. Yeah. And I think being content throughout life is really, I think, the antidote to a lot of that.
Right. I think it's important to really get to the heart as to why and where retirement even started, because when retirement hasn't been around since human history. This is it's like a fairly new concept.
Yeah, I mean, really, it's late 1800s.
Okay.
That's the first time that you go back and see stuff about retirement and what was going on. And there was a German chancellor, Otto von Bismarck was his name, and he kind of engineered this new social concept to really create the ability for people not to work. It was called old age pensions. It was designed for truly elderly people. It didn't look like people in their 50s and 60s who just were done working.
Right.
It were people, they were talking about people that really couldn't. In fact, they made comments about they are disabled from work by age. Like that means they physically couldn't work.
Right.
Most retirees today, as they walk away, could work, continue, but they choose not to. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm saying is that was not the original, genesis of this thing. It started very different from where it is today. And we saw throughout history things changed to make retirement what it is. Don't forget back then, your life expectancy was far less than what it's at today, right? Almost 40 years later in the 1930s, FDR kind of signed the New Deal, which included the Social Security Act. It took it a step further. And they actually gave a new age. It was like, well, when you're 65, and that's about the age at what, when people should be done working.
Gotcha.
Right? And it's changed a little bit since then, but really it wasn't designed ever to be a permanent vacation for people.
Right.
That has slowly evolved over time, and really part of the FDR, with Social Security was they wanted to get younger people into the workforce.
Okay.
There were people that were very capable of working, but remember at that time in our economy, we wanted people in the workplace,
Sure.
and we needed to get some of those older people out. Let's get the younger unemployed people in. And actually, a lot of retirees back then, looking into my research, were actually very unhappy with that move. They were like, what do you mean? We're too old to work, but yet too young to die.
Right.
And that was one of the themes that kept coming up. As I wrote this book, it was, I don't want to be in that place. And that was really hard for these new retirees to take. It wasn't a terribly exciting time for new retirees. That all shifted, when we came into I'm guessing this would have been really through the 1940s and 50s. There was a big shift, and into the 60s where we really created retirement communities. That's a whole nother show, right? What are retirement communities? What do they look like? How should they be viewed, positives and negatives? But that was really changes that continually happened throughout retirement to what it is today.
That's really interesting. So that's where the 65 came in, was probably back in the 30s with FDR, where people kind of assumed, because that even today, it's always like, even people our age, in our low 40s, kind of middle age-ish, we're like, well, another 25 years, and it's always kind of this, general guesstimation that in my mid 60s, I'm going to retire or begin the retirement process. But that's when it started, was back in the 30s?
Yeah.
Okay.
August 14, 1935, FDR signed the New Deal.
Yeah.
And the Social Security Act was part of law at that point. And that really started guaranteeing income for unemployed and retirees. And they kind of started that at age 65.
But it wasn't sold as, hey, by the way, at 65 now, we're going to get you retired. You're going to have a couple of mil in the bank, and then you can go down to Florida and buy an RV.
No.
I mean, that's what it was. That's not what it was. And as you said, I think that's an interesting point. They didn't want it.
Yeah,
it really wasn't received very well. These people wanted to continue to work, but felt kind of like, what? I get kind of forced a little bit to kind of hedge towards, move aside and retire. That's a really interesting point.
Yeah, it made sense. The government was saying 65 is when we retire, and they're going to give me some money, right?
Yeah.
So a monthly income, which is Social Security, to do that.
Right.
And that's how I'm going to move out of the workforce, allow younger workers to come in. And no, they weren't too excited. And like I said, several different times I read this, well, what am I? I'm too old to work, but too young to die.
Yeah.
I'm stuck in what some called role-less roles. And then that was like, I'm stuck here. And I think we in the financial services industry kind of created these, over the decades, kind of created retirement communities, kind of created a different look to what retirement should be.
Right.
And I think as we look at what we've done, I'm not saying it's all bad, but we have to realize the genesis of retirement till we realize what and why we have retirement the way it is today.
Sure. I think that's an important point, because that's not even 100 years ago that we had this thing instilled, and then really has morphed into what it was. Look at what happened in the 40s. You had World War II. And then look, as people kind of came out of the Cold War era, then if you look at the actual economy, like the economy really started to begin to grow in the 50s, 60s, especially in the 70s and 80s. And isn't it interesting that that's about the same time where that mentality really started to shift, instead of like now all of a sudden they're too old to work, too young to die, to like, okay, now we're going to make 65. This is going to be your golden years. And that's where this whole thing of a permanent vacation came into play. That's really interesting how that all came about.
Yeah, and here's a statistic for you. In 1950, half of men over age 65 remained in the workforce. By 2000, less than 18%.
Whoa.
And that's a dramatic, that's 50 years, a long time, but that's a dramatic shift as far as who's working. And just to credit, I took that from a book by Mark Friedman, Encore, Finding Work That Matters in the Second Half of Life. But it's also in my book. But just to note that, it was incredible. As I studied some of the stuff, I'm like, I didn't even know that. And it's amazing. I've been working with retirees a very long time. But now I don't know the current statistic, but it has continued in
probably go down,
Absolutely.
Yep. And then look at what's happened as the inverse. People are living longer. They have more wealth and more time now to spend. And isn't it funny that also then corresponds with the showroom effect of like this thing that they work their life for and they get it, and it's not really this thing that was really sold them to be. That's really, I think that's not a coincidence that those two things kind of come together.
Yeah, not if retirement ends up looking like the permanent vacation and all about me.
Sure.
And it very much becomes the showroom effect.
Right. So how do people avoid this? Where does it start? What advice do you give to people who haven't retired yet so they don't fall into this trap? Where do you begin?
Well, I think first let's realize that retirement's not the end of anything. It's not. Retirees today have more to offer than ever. Let's look at skills, talents, abilities. What can I offer the world? If we're coming into retirement with that mindset, if we're coming into retirement saying, I'm not done, this is the beginning. What can that look like for retirees? And it can look way different, and you can add so much value and then tie in other-centered living. And I think that's really the key. Yeah,
exactly. When do people start kind of beginning this process? Again, we're talking about people that might be retiring in their mid 60s, and we've talked about this on the podcast before. When do we start kind of this dissension process? What I'm hearing from you is it kind of starts with a mindset shift. Let's say there's a retiree, a person out there who's maybe 5-10 years away from retirement. Is there a way to be able to get that into action? Is there something they can tangibly do now to kind of start prepping to make this shift in their old life? What's maybe something they could do?
I think focus on others no matter what, no matter what the age. Let's make sure we're planning properly that way and saying, okay, what types of things today am I doing to impact those around me? It's easier while you're working than it will be in retirement,
right?
Unless you're very diligent about looking for those things. But just start maybe practicing this retirement a little bit. When you do have weeks off, what does it look like? How do you spend your time? Do things like that just to kind of reset, and again, start thinking more about what you want your retirement to look like, and engage help and consider. I think more and more retirees today need to put the kind of resources they have into their financial planning, into their non-financial planning.
Right.
That's what we're about. That's what the Repurposed podcast is about. That's why I wrote the book. I want retirees to think about this stuff, because no matter how well you've planned financially, if you haven't covered this stuff, it really won't matter.
Yeah. Exactly. We got about 30 seconds left. Any final thought you want to leave people regarding the showroom effect, how people can maybe avoid it, things to think about, one takeaway? What do you got?
Well, just think about this. The global population of retirees is projected to double to 1.3 billion in 2040. Okay? There's a lot of you out there that are going to be coming in and can really help society today, and we absolutely need it more than ever to see retirees step up and make a difference in their communities, that's what I'd say. Let's look at this as probably the best time to make a difference in your community.
Well, thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Retire Repurposed. Remember to subscribe on iTunes, and if you want more information, go to our website, retirerepurposed.com. Remember, don't retire, become repurposed. We'll see you next time.